August 29th, 1526, a single day that forever changed the destiny of Hungary. Under the scorching sun of the Mohács plain, 25,000 men faced an overwhelming enemy. They knew this was a battle for the very survival of their kingdom. But what happened there went beyond their worst nightmares. In the heart of Europe, the Kingdom of Hungary was a power in crisis. Weakened by internal disputes, it now watched as the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, advanced like a raging storm. The approaching battle would not just be a military defeat, it would mark the end of an era. The Hungarians stood alone that day. Their calls for help had gone largely unanswered by their Christian neighbors. King Louis II, barely 20 years old, led his outnumbered forces against an Ottoman army 4 times their size. The odds were staggeringly against them, but they had no choice but to fight. What makes this battle so fascinating is how quickly everything unraveled. Within just 2 hours, yes, 2 short hours, a kingdom that had stood proud for over 500 years would face a catastrophe from which it would never truly recover. The battlefield itself seemed to conspire against the Hungarians, with unexpected terrain challenges trapping their famous heavy cavalry in mud and rendering their greatest military asset useless. Many don't realize that the Battle of Mohács represents one of history's most decisive moments, when the balance of power in Eastern Europe fundamentally shifted. Before Mohács, Hungary was the shield of Christendom against Ottoman expansion. After Mohács, that shield lay shattered, opening the way for Ottoman advances that would threaten Vienna itself. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of great empires like this video, subscribe to the Modern Age Chronicles channel and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we explore how a single afternoon of combat changed the map of Europe for centuries to come. 16th century Hungary was a kingdom deeply divided against itself. The young King Louis II, barely 20 years old, had inherited a throne surrounded by trouble from every side. Ambitious nobles who cared more about their own power than the kingdom's survival continuously undermined his authority. These power-hungry aristocrats refused to fund a proper standing army, leaving Hungary with military forces that were woefully unprepared for the storm gathering at their borders. The Hungarian army that would face the Ottomans was a shadow of its former glory. Once feared throughout Europe under leaders like Matthias Corvinus just decades earlier, Hungary's military had deteriorated into a disorganized collection of feudal levies with outdated tactics and equipment. The kingdom's famous Black Army, once among Europe's first professional standing forces, had been disbanded due to lack of funds, a fatal mistake they would soon pay for dearly. While Hungary crumbled from within, across the border stood Suleiman the Magnificent, commanding the greatest military power of the age, the Ottoman Empire. Fresh from conquering the mighty fortress of Belgrade, Suleiman led an army that moved with machine-like precision. His forces were disciplined, well-supplied, and armed with advanced artillery that would prove devastating on the battlefield. Unlike the fractured Hungarian leadership, the Ottoman military answered to one man alone, their Sultan. Here's something most people don't know. After the battle, the Ottomans sent the head of King Louis II to Constantinople as a trophy of their victory. Imagine that, a king's severed head displayed as a symbol of Ottoman triumph in their magnificent capital, and the consequences were even more profound for Hungary itself. For years afterward, the once proud kingdom remained divided into 3 parts: a central region directly under Ottoman rule, an eastern principality of Transylvania that served as an Ottoman vassal state, and a narrow western strip controlled by the Habsburgs. This fragmentation marked the beginning of 150 years of Ottoman domination in the region. The battle that approached wasn't simply about territory, it represented a clash of civilizations. On one side stood medieval, feudal Hungary with its outdated military structure. On the other, the highly organized, almost modern Ottoman war machine. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redraw the map of Central Europe for centuries to come. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how mismatched these two leaders truly were. This wasn't just a battle between armies, it was a collision between two rulers who couldn't have been more different. On one side stood Suleiman the Magnificent at the height of his powers. Just 32 years old, he was already being called the lawgiver by his own people for his brilliant administrative reforms. As a military commander, he was simply unmatched. Suleiman had personally led his forces to capture Belgrade, a fortress the Ottomans had tried and failed to take for decades. He commanded an army of 100,000 disciplined soldiers, including the elite Janissary Corps, former Christian children who had been taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained to become some of the most feared warriors in the world. What made Suleiman's army truly terrifying wasn't just its size, but its technology. The Ottoman artillery was among the most advanced in the world, with massive cannons that could reduce stone walls to rubble. Many people don't realize that the Ottoman Empire was actually far ahead of most European powers in adopting and perfecting gunpowder weapons. Suleiman's army included thousands of professional musketeers whose coordinated volleys would devastate the Hungarian lines. And then there was Louis II of Hungary. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Just 20 years old, Louis had been crowned king when he was merely a child of 10. Unlike Suleiman, who had been carefully prepared for rulership his entire life, Louis had never really learned how to govern effectively. While Suleiman controlled his empire with absolute authority, Louis struggled to command even the respect of his own nobles. Here's a detail that really captures Louis's desperate situation. On the eve of battle, he was essentially bankrupt. He had been forced to melt down silver from royal churches just to fund his last-minute military preparations. His army of 25,000 men was a hastily assembled force, with many nobles refusing to arrive on time or send their promised troops. Louis lacked experienced military advisors he could trust. His best generals were divided on strategy, with some urging caution while others, fearing accusations of cowardice, pushed for immediate attack. The young king, afraid of appearing weak, ultimately chose the most dangerous option, a direct confrontation against an enemy 4 times their size. The inequality between these two leaders was painfully obvious to everyone, but what nobody expected was just how quickly and completely disaster would strike. Many European observers assumed that while Hungary might lose ground, their famous heavy cavalry would at least inflict serious damage on the Ottoman forces. They were tragically mistaken. What makes this confrontation so fascinating is that it represented more than just a military mismatch. It was a collision between medieval Europe and a rapidly modernizing Ottoman military machine. Suleiman's forces fought with coordinated tactics, artillery support, and professional discipline, while the Hungarians relied on outdated chivalric notions of battlefield courage that would prove catastrophically inadequate against gunpowder weapons and superior numbers. August 29th, 1526. The sun beat down on the plains of Mohács as the Hungarian army formed their battle lines. The air was thick with tension. For the Hungarian nobles and their king, this was the moment to prove their valor, to show that Christian knights could still triumph against the Ottoman threat. What they didn't realize was that they were about to march into one of history's most devastating military disasters. In less than 2 hours, yes, just 2 hours, the Ottoman forces utterly annihilated the Hungarian lines. The battle began with the Hungarians advancing in traditional medieval fashion, heavy cavalry at the center, ready to smash through enemy lines as they had done for centuries. But Suleiman had prepared the battlefield masterfully. The Hungarian cavalry, their pride and greatest weapon, suddenly found themselves trapped in unexpected marshy ground between fish ponds that didn't appear on their maps. Imagine the scene. Thousands of armored knights and horses suddenly sinking into mud, their momentum completely lost. These weren't just any knights. They were Europe's most elite heavy cavalry, wearing full-plate armor that now became a deadly weight, dragging them down as they struggled to advance. And then came the Ottoman artillery. Those massive cannons opened fire on the stalled Hungarian forces with devastating precision. The sound must have been deafening, the smoke and chaos complete. Ottoman janissaries with firearms stepped forward in disciplined formation, firing volley after volley into the Hungarian ranks. Men who had boasted of their courage and noble lineage that morning were now falling by the hundreds, unable even to reach their enemy. Here's a detail most history books gloss over. When the Hungarian front lines finally broke through to engage the Ottoman forces directly, they actually reached Suleiman himself. For a brief moment, the Sultan's personal guard was overwhelmed, and Suleiman was in genuine danger. Had the Hungarian attack been better coordinated, history might have taken a dramatically different turn, but the opportunity was lost in the chaos. The most tragic figure of all was King Louis II himself. As his army collapsed around him, the 20-year-old king attempted to flee the battlefield. Wearing heavy armor and riding an exhausted horse, he tried to cross the Seal stream, swollen from recent rains. In a cruel twist of fate, his horse lost footing on the muddy bank, and Louis, the king who had rushed into battle to save his kingdom, drowned in less than 2 feet of water while wearing the crown of Hungary. 7 bishops, 28 barons, and over 15,000 Hungarian soldiers died that day. The cream of Hungary's nobility and military leadership was wiped out in a single afternoon. Bodies littered the field so densely that when Suleiman toured the battlefield the next day, he reportedly said, "I came to fight men, not to destroy an entire nation." Hungary had lost not just a battle, but its king, most of its nobility, and ultimately its independence, all in a single catastrophic day. Did you know that the Ottomans used fake deserters to lure the Hungarians into a trap? In the days before the battle, Ottoman soldiers pretending to be defectors fed the Hungarian command false information about weaknesses in Suleiman's army, encouraging them to attack at exactly the spot where the Ottoman artillery was concentrated. This ancient form of military deception worked perfectly. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most consequential battles, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Modern Age Chronicles channel. We have plenty more history coming your way. And here's a question for you. What do you think was the Hungarians' biggest mistake in this battle? Was it their rush to engage a superior force, their failure to wait for reinforcements, or perhaps their reliance on outdated military tactics? Let us know in the comments below. The battle was over, but Hungary's tragedy was just beginning. With King Louis II dead without an heir, the Hungarian crown became the center of a bitter power struggle that would transform Central Europe forever. The aftermath of Mohács wasn't just a military defeat, it was the end of Hungary as an independent power. Two claimants quickly emerged to fill the vacuum. On one side stood Ferdinand of Habsburg, brother of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and brother-in-law to the deceased King Louis. On the other stood John Zápolya, a powerful Hungarian nobleman who had missed the battle itself, but now claimed the crown with Ottoman backing. What followed was a civil war that tore apart what little remained of Hungarian unity. Here's what most people don't realize about this period. The battle didn't just divide Hungary politically, it literally split the country into 3 distinct parts. The central region, including the capital Buda, fell directly under Ottoman rule. The eastern territories became the semi-independent Principality of Transylvania, a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, and only a narrow strip of western Hungary remained under Habsburg control, though they continued to claim the entire kingdom. Imagine living through this chaos. Towns that had stood for centuries were burned to the ground. Entire villages disappeared as their populations were killed or enslaved. The countryside that had once been known as the breadbasket of Europe was systematically plundered. In the decades following Mohács, Hungary's population dropped by nearly 30%, not just from war, but from famine and disease that followed in war's wake. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story is how the Hungarian people themselves were transformed. For generations, Hungarians had proudly seen themselves as defenders of Christian Europe against Ottoman expansion. Now many found themselves paying taxes to Constantinople, while others pledged allegiance to the distant Habsburg courts in Vienna. The once proud Hungarian nobility was reduced to choosing between foreign masters. And what about the rest of Europe? Here's the most maddening part of the story. Christian Europe only truly recognized the Ottoman threat after Hungary had fallen. For decades, Hungarian kings had desperately called for crusades and military aid, warning that they formed the last barrier between the Ottoman Empire and Central Europe. These pleas had largely fallen on deaf ears, with Western powers too busy fighting each other to worry about threats from the East. After Mohács, the realization came too late. When Ottoman forces appeared at the gates of Vienna just 3 years later, in 1529, Europe finally understood what Hungary had been saying all along. The Habsburg Empire frantically began building fortifications and raising armies to face a threat that Hungary had been containing for over a century. There's a bitter irony here that's rarely discussed. The very European powers that had ignored Hungary's pleas for help would later portray themselves as the saviors of Christian civilization against Ottoman expansion. Meanwhile, Hungary, once a European great power with a unique culture and political system, was relegated to a forgotten borderland, a mere battlefield where others' imperial ambitions played out. Perhaps the most lasting consequence was cultural. The Hungarian nobility who survived increasingly looked west, adopting Habsburg customs and sometimes even language, while much of the Hungarian peasantry lived under Ottoman rule. The country that had once been a bridge between East and West was now torn between them, its identity fragmented just as thoroughly as its territory. Nearly 500 years have passed since the Battle of Mohács, but its shadow still looms large over Hungarian national identity. This wasn't just another military defeat. It was a wound that cut to the very soul of a nation, a collective trauma that continues to shape how Hungarians see themselves and their place in the world. To this day, Hungarians refer to Mohács as the greatest national tragedy. The phrase, "we lost like at Mohács," remains a common Hungarian expression used to describe overwhelming defeats or catastrophic failures. Imagine how profound a disaster must be to become embedded in everyday language for half a millennium. That's the legacy of Mohács. What makes this battle so enduring in Hungarian memory? It's not just that they lost. It's everything that was lost with it. Before Mohács, Hungary was a major European power with a distinct culture and political system. After Mohács, the country began a long period of foreign domination that would last for centuries. First came the Ottomans, then the Habsburgs, later the Nazis, and finally the Soviets. For many Hungarians, Mohács marks the beginning of a long struggle to regain true independence, a struggle that in many ways continues into the modern era. The battle has taken on an almost mythical quality in Hungarian literature and art. The great 20th century Hungarian writer Gyula Ilyes once wrote that Mohács is not just a battle lost, it is the moment when we cease to be the masters of our own fate. The 19th century poet Mihaly Vörösmarty famously connected Mohács to deeper questions of Hungarian identity in his epic works. Even today, Hungarian filmmakers and novelists continue to revisit this pivotal moment in their nation's history. Here's something fascinating. The battlefield itself has become a place of national pilgrimage. Every August 29th, thousands of Hungarians gather at Mohács to commemorate what they lost. They don't celebrate a victory, they honor a defeat. This speaks volumes about how central this trauma remains to Hungarian national consciousness. The psychological impact of Mohács extends far beyond mere historical memory. Many historians and sociologists have noted a distinctly Hungarian form of historical pessimism that traces its roots to this battle. There's even a term for it, Mohács syndrome, the tendency to expect the worst possible outcome in national affairs. When facing challenges, Hungarians sometimes joke darkly that more was lost at Mohács as a way of putting present difficulties into perspective. Perhaps most poignantly, Mohács represents a profound what-if moment in European history. What if the Hungarian nobles had set aside their petty differences? What if reinforcements had arrived in time? What if the weather had been different, sparing King Louis his ignoble death? The entire map of Europe might look different today. Central Europe might speak Hungarian rather than German as its dominant language. The Ottoman Empire might never have reached Vienna. The entire course of religious conflict in Europe might have unfolded differently. One day, one battle changed everything. And that's why Mohács remains such a powerful symbol. It reminds us that history can turn on a single moment, that entire civilizations can rise or fall based on decisions made in a matter of hours. For Hungarians, it's a somber reminder of their vulnerability in the crossroads of Europe, caught between East and West, between empires and ideologies. And yet, despite this trauma, or perhaps because of it, Hungary survived. Its language, its culture, its unique identity persisted through centuries of foreign rule. Maybe that's the true legacy of Mohács, not just the defeat itself, but the remarkable resilience of a people who refused to disappear from history, even after losing everything in a single afternoon on a muddy battlefield nearly 5 centuries ago. Mohács was far more than just a lost battle. It was the pivotal moment when Hungary ceased to exist as an independent kingdom, and instead became merely a piece on the chessboard of Europe's great powers. In many ways, the echoes of that fateful afternoon in 1526 can still be heard today in the politics and culture of Central Europe. What makes Mohács so fascinating to historians is how it represents one of history's true turning points, a single event after which nothing would ever be the same. Before the battle, Hungary was the dominant power in Eastern Europe, with a distinct culture and political system that had flourished for over 500 years. After Mohács, the Hungarian people would not regain true independence until the 20th century. There's a haunting detail about the aftermath that perfectly captures the tragedy. When Ottoman forces entered Buda, they found the royal palace largely abandoned. Inside the treasury lay the crown of Saint Stephen, the sacred crown that had symbolized Hungarian sovereignty since the year 1000. The Ottomans, not fully understanding its significance, reportedly used it as a common drinking cup. Can you imagine a more powerful symbol of a nation's fall from glory? The story of Mohács offers us timeless lessons about leadership, military preparedness, and the consequences of internal division. The Hungarian nobles who fought amongst themselves rather than uniting against a common threat. The young king who lacked the experience to lead in crisis. The military leaders who clung to outdated tactics in the face of technological change. These mistakes have been repeated countless times throughout history, often with similarly devastating results. And this brings us to perhaps the most intriguing question of all. Could Hungary's destiny have been different? What if King Louis had waited for reinforcements? What if the Hungarian nobility had set aside their differences earlier? What if Western Christendom had recognized the Ottoman threat sooner? History is filled with these tantalizing what-ifs, these roads not taken that might have led to entirely different worlds. Some Hungarian historians argue that even without Mohács, the kingdom was already in decline and would have eventually fallen to either Ottoman or Habsburg domination. Others maintain that a united Hungary might have served as a powerful third force in Central Europe, potentially changing the entire course of European history. What do you think? Could Hungary's fate have been different with better leadership or different decisions? I hope this journey through one of history's most consequential, yet often overlooked battles, has given you a new perspective on how quickly fortunes can change, how a single afternoon on a muddy battlefield can redraw the map of an entire continent and alter the destiny of millions. If you enjoyed this exploration of the Battle of Mohács, please leave a like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the Modern Age Chronicles channel to follow more content about the early modern period. History isn't just about memorizing dates and names, it's about understanding the critical moments that shaped our world, the decisions that made us who we are today. And if you have suggestions for other pivotal historical moments you'd like us to cover, drop them in the comments below. Until our next historical adventure, remember that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the world we've inherited, the cultures we cherish, and the lessons we choose to learn or ignore. See you in the next video.